desperately that the play would simply destroy it. It appeared to be only on the outskirts of the town. The Lord Chancellor and the most obscure alleys among the poor people. Horrible news for London with the travelers. Whole families were dying, and the sickness was spreading across the whole city. By Christmas, thousands of Londoners were dying every week. The plague raged on for months and months. By the June following year, the sickness had spread into the city centers. Londoners tried to flee the country, but the villagers drove them away, terrified that they might bring the plague with them. London few dared to venture from their houses. Very few people walked about, so much that grass began to spring in some places. Few dared to venture from their houses. In London, few dared to venture from their houses. Shelters are in. Very few people, the grass began to spring in some places, and thieves violence in every place, especially within the wall. So many people died that London began to run out of money to bury the dead. The churchyards are now stuffed with dead bodies under the London Observer Road. In many places are 2 or 3 feet higher than they were before. Men are hired to whack the play cards to the street, shouting, "Bring out your dead!" so the bodies could be collected and dumped into huge pits. The illustrator Daniel Defoe was only a child during the plague, and he used stories of others to write an account of the plague. He wrote, "London might as well be said to be all volunteer. The plague supplied all medicines. The physicians were seized with in their towns. They were scared scarfs any passing by the streets. But that several dead bodies would be lying here and there upon the ground. Death region in every corner. The plague spread like fleas who lived on rats. They found the animals who made the plague worse, but the wrong animals. The mayor of London ordered all dogs and cats killed. Between there were more rats, more fleas, and more plagues. keep a diary for those years. Little noise was heard day or night by tolling of funeral bells. Finally, the plague began to die away. It raged for a year. Over 2,000 people had died. 2 out of every 5 people in London. But as Christmas drew near, shops began to reopen. As people came out and walked in London streets. Slowly, London was returning to normal. But lasted another 9 months later, another tragedy started. One September evening, the year 1666, the king's baker was stoking his fire in the night in his bakery. The pudding fell unnoticed and began to burn in twain to a stack of fresh puddings. The floor caught on fire and spread onto the walls. Then the bakery dissolved into flames. And the fire spread to the baker's house nearby. Soon the Lord Mayor of London himself was awoken by his servants and told there was fire burning in London. Only 2 houses were alight, but because London wooden houses were so dry and close together, small fires could spread quickly. Lord Mayor had been sound asleep and he was frightened. He got up grumpily in his coach and rattled down to Pudding Lane. He got up and walked down to the fire and gazed at it. Pish, he said. A woman could put that out. And he got back to his coach and ordered it back home. But barely the Lord Mayor had disappeared down Pudding Lane, then the fire spread to the house next door, and the wind had been blowing the flames across Pudding Lane. Some of the people in the nearby houses were collected their precious belongings and carried them to the stone church nearby, where they might be safe from the flames. Others formed lines down to the Thames River and passed water back in these leather buckets, chamber pots, and soup bowls. Every other container they could find, but the fire was spreading too quickly. Just down from the bakery, a shipbuilder's house stood, and its cellar cramped with barrels of cars to steal the seams of ships. When the cellars burned, the barrels exploded. The roofs of the house blew off. Fire sprouted upwards. Bits of grinding single wood flew out for dozens of yards and caught on another house's fire. It was, in the word of Samuel Pepys, the infinite fire. Everything after so long a drought inviting constituted even the stones of the churches, the houses, all in flames and flaming at once. Poor noise of the flames made crackling of houses after ruin. Fire spread across the kitchen. It burned wharves, stacks of timber, houses, and even Barnard's castle. A stone castle filled with wooden furniture. Timbers, shops, churches were burned. Hundreds of people fled into the enormous church of London Centre, St. Paul's Cathedral. The flames swept up the walls, burning the timbers and melting the lead in the roof until it ran down towards the level like molten lava. The stones in the walls themselves began to explode from the heat. The fire burned for 3 days. The soldiers fighting it began to blow up houses in front of it with gunpowder and putting away the wreckage so that the fire would have no fuel. The wind began to die down. The fire hesitated and finally began to flicker out. 4/5 of London had been burned. 13,000 houses, almost 100 churches, and almost all official buildings were gone. Courts, jails, post offices, printing presses were gone. Londoner John Evelyn was weeping in his diary. London was, but is no more. The Sun King of France. One of the French royal palaces glowed in the warm afternoon sunshine. King of France, Louis XIII, was deep in a meeting with his ministers. The Queen was writing letters in her boudoir. Servants scurried through the corridors. Upstairs in the nursery, one maid groaned at the grass-stained clothes of Daffodil, the heir to the throne. Another polished the boy's silver-plated breakfast dishes. Down in the kitchen, Daffodil nurse was telling the cook to fix Flemish soup. For the Daffodil's dinner, he had been serving slightly cold, and she wanted him to then proper invalid supper. Outside, the little boy himself wandered through the gardens alone. He was barely 4 years old, but somehow he had managed to escape from the palace without anyone noticing. He found a stick on the ground and poked it at the glass along the path he had walked. Just ahead, a fountain burbled down the wide basin. The little boy bent over, stirring the water with a stick. He leaned a little further, and his foot slipped. He fell into the water that was over his head. Passing peasants that had been heard the splashes and hauled him out, that he would have drowned. Not long after the prince's whim, his father died. At the age of 4 and 8 months, Louis XV is now the king of France. Louis XIV was now the king of France. He was the lord of every French citizen and master of every blade of French grass and clump of dirt. You see, the French king claimed to be the owner of the country he ruled. The French called their king visible divinity, the gods represented on earth. So while Charles II ruled without opposition, his fathers and his ministers ruled and made France one of the powerful nations in Europe. Louis XIV was the most powerful man in the nation. When he was still young, Louis's advisor, Chinese retirement ruled first. The man who had been trained by Richelieu to rule with a ruthless and strict plan, demanding that every French citizen obey the word of the king of that one. He reminded Louis that the king should be treated almost like a god. When Mary died, Louis announced that he would now rule absolutely without the counsel of his advisors. So he would be first minister first out. No French king had ruled without advisors for almost 100 years. No one believed that this elegant young man skilled at dancing and courtship would be an efficient ruler. Louis himself knew that what he wanted. In his memories later on, he might not have preferred the fame over anyone else. For the next 50 years, Louis ruled as an absolute king. He worked all day long and every day, including in the morning. He chose the sun as his embodiment to represent his power, and was called the Sun King by his courtiers. But a nobleman, by right, allowed to drive him after a battle. Had him shirt and pants as he dressed. Louis thought that this was a very prosperous relationship for a king to have with his subjects. In a letter to his son, he wrote, letting the people lay down the laws to use the worst calamity of a man of our rank and something. When the people try to take the power for themselves, the more you grant them, the more they want. The more favors the one who wants power, and the most are always the stupidest. The Sun King decided be a king in Brandenburg. When he paraded into Brandenburg, entered his waters, he were looking like a king, cannons fired all over the city. Military. Candles and torches and lanterns were lit in every window. The city glowed with the stars. Louis XIV, Frederick wanted to be an absolute monarch, obeyed without question by all others. Well, he knew that the Holy Roman Empire would control, and he didn't have a strong enough army of money to wage wars to defeat his enemies. Instead, Frederick behaved like an actual all of his subjects, even the ones in Brandenburg, could call him their king. He spent an enormous amount of money on feasts and elaborate ceremonies. His court was one of the splendidest in Europe. His son later said, "My father had the appearance but Frederick's play acting helped the citizens of his kingdom, both inside and outside of the Holy Roman Empire, began to think themselves as one of the Persian kingdom. Imagine that your parents got tired of everyone calling themselves upstairs and bedroom, or downstairs computer room, and decided, "I'll think of ourselves as Smiths." Instead of commanding you to call you a Smith, they hold a big party to show how they are proud to be Smiths. Every morning, they parade through every room. Smiths, how lucky you are to be the Smiths. After much of this, you start thinking yourself as Smith rather than a downstairs computer room. That's a little like what happened to Frederick's new kingdom of Russia. Frederick encouraged all of his people to think of themselves as citizens of German kingdoms of Persia. So land like the island of Britain to a monarch like was the 14th or Philip II of Spain. Frederick knew that his kingdom was made up of two different pieces of land and that to be loyal to the state. Persons learned to alliance to an idea of a German king, ruled over by a German kingdom. They used the word Reich, the German word kingdom, to refer to this German kingdom. Frederick spent most of his kingdom building this idea of a German kingdom called Persia. He founded the great Persian University, known as the Persian Academy of Arts and Royal Persian Academy of Sciences. He gave this Academy of Sciences the job of studying the Roman language and teaching all Persian how to use it properly. Frederick's son, Frederick William I, took Frederick's idea and formally announced that both Persia and Brandenburg were part of the Persian kingdom. He made the army power and Frederick's grandson, Frederick, taken to his grandfather's kingdom name. He added land to Prussia. Himself a royal palace, not in Königsberg, but in Brandenburg state. For this, Frederick's grandson became known as Frederick the Great. And one day, the Prussian kingdom that his grandfather established became the modern country of Germany. War against the colonies. Philip's War. Well, the kings of Europe fought and schemed to make their way to their kingdoms larger. English colonies in North America were growing larger all on their own. More and more men and women invaded the journey across the Atlantic Ocean. New settlements spread across the Massachusetts, over the Island Maui Road, and continued out. New settlements. Wampum to give them more lands for their growing time. The king of Wampum tried Metacom saw that his kingdom was vanished. When his people went out to fish in their favorite stream, the banks were covered with colonists. When they walked into 100 miles, English uncle behind the trees waiting for their time resolved. Metacom announced to his friends that I will not see the day when I have no kingdom. One cold January morning, a young Wampum man left his tiny village and hurried down the icy road towards Plymouth Bridge. He had grown up to be Metacom's kingdom, but instincts had gone to the little college built by English to train Christian ministers. This little college, the English called Harvard, the Wampum boy had given the English name of John C. Sassaman. Sassaman knew Metacom well because no one could carry messages to English music. But now John Sassaman carried a warning. John walked for hours, shivering in the great winter air, and speaking numbly. Finally, the tall, wooden walls of the Plymouth fortress came into view. John Sassaman hurried through the gates. "Where's the governor?" he asked. "I must be prepared away." The governor of Plymouth, Julian Winslow, was busy with paperwork, but John Winslow waited. John Sassaman waited, anxiously glancing at Plymouth's strong walls. When he was finally brought into the governor's office, he spoke so quickly Winslow could barely understand him. "King Metacom is raising an army," he blurted out. "He's asking every other tribe to join him and fight against you. He plans to drive the English out back to their home. I come to warn you. Please, tell someone back. Doesn't know I'm here. If you already found out that I wanted to kill me, Winslow sighed. Like many English, he thought that one power was stupid and not sincere. You can hardly believe an Indian, you might poor friend. Even when they tell the truth, John said, "Go back home." He said, "Plymouth Plantation is safe." Sanderson pleaded to stay, but Winslow refused. Sanderson left the fortress, his eyes were full of tears. And a week later, John Sanderson disappeared. His body was found frozen in the ice on a pond. His neck was broken. Winslow at the Plymouth Plantation. Leaders took him to Burns years had been killed. Two men came, claiming that they had seen three armed and killed Sassaman and thrown him into the pond. The English decided to show Metacom who was really in charge of Massachusetts. English soldiers arrested the warriors and brought them to Hollywood. But the warriors tried convicted of murder and was executed. Metacom was praised. How dare the English invade his village and drive away his warriors? 3 days after the execution, Metacom and his men attacked Little Plymouth settlement, burning houses and driving the settlers away. The war had begun. The war between the English and Metacom dragged on for months. The formers had more guns. The Native Americans were better at surprise attacks and ambushes. Metacom convinced their Native American tribes nearby to join him with his war against the English. Native American warriors burned English settlements, killed English colonists, and took captives, only releasing them in exchange for money and weapons. One of these captive women, Mary Oswald, wrote about the attack on her house. "It was the dolefulest day that ever mine I saw." She lamented, "Oh, places. Indians shot against the house, so the bullets seemed to fly like hail. Some in our house were fighting for their lives, others wallowing in their blood. The house opened the fire over our heads. Then I took my children to go forward and leave the house, but as soon as we came to the door and the Indians shot so thick that bullets rattled against the house as if one had taken the handsome and thrown into it. Mary and the children were captured and held with prisoners for a week until her husband paid money for a release. After 8 months of war, 1,300 Englishmen from Plymouth banded together to make a strong attack yet on the Metacom forces. Metacom and his warrior joined another tribe, Numberset, and climbed depths in the middle of the treacherous swamp. The Englishmen slashed through the swamp and attacked the Metacom camp. The battle, which became known as the Great Swamp Fight, almost wiped out the American warriors. Metacom himself fled west into the colony of New York and tried to convince Mohawk to give him fresh orders and weapons. Mohawks refused. Metacom tried to keep fighting with his remaining men. But a shrinking war band could not resist forever. 8 months after the Great Swamp Fight, English soldiers surrounded the Metacom camp. Malcolm escaped, but his wife and 9-year-old son were captured and sold as slaves in South America. Metacom invaded the English for 10 more days. But was in the middle of the swamp, unable to get away. A Native American warrior who had joined the English forces shot Metacom. English cut off his head and paraded back into Plymouth in triumph. Metacom sat on a pole in the middle of the settlement where it remained for years. Because the English called Metacom King Philip, this war became known as King Philip's War. 12 English cows have been burned to the ground. Out of 1 of every 16 men have died. Flocks have been destroyed and farms have been leveled. The following winters, many of the colonists died of starvation, and more than 3,000 Native American tribes have died as well. Entire tribes have been killed. Few of the remaining members of the tribes scattered, fleeing up to the north. Now the English continue to spread through North America, across the lands that was left empty by King Philip's War. This is the end of this video.